Hi, all, and welcome to the last week. Thank you for your patience and your understanding as I traveled overseas. Clearly, I made it. It was a fantastic trip. If any of you want to hear about the Lovecraft papers, go ahead and shoot me an email. I will be happy to talk about the merits of my friends. We were unable to record the panel just because of logistics, but it was really interesting to see how the three papers came together. Either way, I want to do a bit of housekeeping, going over your final paper assignments, and make a quick note again about the post this week. I'm also changing one thing. You will not have a quiz this week. Again, I want you focusing in on your final papers so you can have the best final paper that you can. So you just have to do the readings this week. They are rather short. The game videos will be posted. I think one is uploading as we speak now. The other one shall go live later this afternoon. You have to watch those, this lecture, and watch Alien, which I want to talk a bit about today in our lecture. But before that, I want to go over your final paper. So right off the bat, the goals of this paper are to help you build your analytical skills that you kind of started off with in your first papers. This is the whole point of the class, essentially. We've been trying to get you and your peers going with how to best present a sophisticated claim about a given topic. It doesn't necessarily have to be Lovecraft in origin, right? This is a skill that can be translated out in the real world. So that's part of the goals of this course, more globally fashioned. This will also give you a chance to build on the skills, like I said, that you covered in your first papers, and that will help you, develop those skills of close reading, specifically literature or complex theory. So you have three options for this final paper. You can pretty much do a longer version of the first one, craft a original close reading claim, either about a single text, film, or song that we have covered. Anything is up for grabs that we have covered. If you feel like you want to return to a text, you're more than welcome. If you think that you want to write about the thing, you're all the movie, you can jump all over that. Or if you want to take a stab at In the Mouth of Madness, you can also do that. Any text that we have read over the course of this class, you can take a scalpel to. Remember, the good claims of close reading involve what I have highlighted down here. And also be aware of that color coding analysis workshop that we touched on last week, just to make sure that you're really emphasizing analysis and not just assertion. The second option is to take a stand critically about the horror genre as we covered it in relationship to Thacker and Trigg's theses, using one film, story, or song, just one of those, to help your analysis. So what I mean by this one, and I think it's worth teasing out, is respond to Thacker and or Trigg and either prove or refute or say something with a difference about their theory, build on their theory by using one film, story, or song that we had in the course, right? Or that we looked at in the course. Pretty bare bones. So you're using the analysis of the song, film, or story to jump, or video game, to jump into a discussion with Thacker, Trigg, or the both of them. Okay? Or then 3, complete a sustained compare and contrast of a Lovecraft story and a Lovecraftian adaptation. So I think this might be helpful for something like taking a contemporary text, like what you're going to be listening to this week, I don't know, I apologize, but the Metallica song, Call of Cthulhu, with the physical copy of Call of Cthulhu. Or you could do the Call of Cthulhu and, for instance, the Dark Adventure Radio Theater's drama, a compare and contrast. This is not just saying what is different and what is the same. What I would want out of a thesis of this is telling me why you think there are differences or similarities. What is the purpose of those? How does the text build on? If you look back in the postings from last week. There were a few of you who went after the Dark Adventure Radio Theater. That's the type of analysis that I want you to engage with here in this option. Note that you are not required to bring in any outside resource into this, or research, into this paper. You can if you want to. But I'm not going to make you do heavy-duty research in such a short class. Really, I want you to work hard on establishing an original claim and backing that up, okay? However, regardless of whatever major assignment that you do here, I would love you to work with at least one critical source that we read for this class. That means responding to Thacker, Trigg, the two articles that the two articles that we read for the second week, or any other critical source that you can think of. You may even use the weird realism readings that were optional last week to engage with. I really just want you to reach out to that critical source, because this is a slightly longer paper. Even though the paper is kind of short, it should be rather focused. So I really want you to pay attention to your claim or your thesis. And for this, I'm opening up, and I said this in the email that I sent out last week, last week. Time is still a construct for me. I'm still in England. I've opened up a forum that you can post your claims or thesis or introduction paragraphs to and get feedback. I believe I said in the email that if nobody responds to yours, I will do my best to respond to it. So you at least have one person responding to your work. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions about the assignment, or you want to run an idea by me, I know a few of you have already emailed me about setting up meetings. I'll respond to you after this lecture. I will be happy to meet or shop or do exactly what I did for the last paper. Really, I want you to walk away with solid analysis in about 8 pages. Cool? All right. So with that said, let's jump in. So the goals and outcomes for this week, I want you to be able to see the broad scope of our class and enter the horror conversation. And what I mean by that last point is just be able to talk with confidence about the patterns, themes, and tropes that you've noticed over the course of these 7 weeks. Which it's hard to believe we've covered what we did in this amount of time. And I do want to say that you all have done exceptionally well at managing the material. So pat on the back for you. You're also, by the end of this week, finished your final papers. The Dropbox is the same, and I will have grades returned to you as soon as possible. I will send back feedback with these papers, regardless of timetable. So like usually the last paper doesn't get feedback. I think it will be valuable for you as scholars to have some feedback going back, especially about your analysis. So you'll be getting final grades. They'll be posted online, not through CourseSite. I do not want you looking at the grade drop on CourseSite. I have my own separate tally sheet that will make adding the bonus material a little easier if you so choose. So you will access your grades through Banner. Once they go live, or once I have them posted, I will send out a class-wide email saying grades have been entered. I don't know the timetable for the university to post them. In the past, they've been rather quick. My grades are final. I want to make that point right now, because I do spend a considerable amount of time on your papers. All grades are final. If you have questions about the grade that you received for the class or for the paper in total, shoot me an email 24 hours. This is important. 24 hours after the assignment is returned, okay, or the final grade is logged. That gives you time to digest and reflect on your own work, and gives me time to have a little distance from doing your grades. But I will gladly walk you through the class grade or the paper grade as I see it. Also, on that note, if you want to chat at any point once term starts up, or if you need recommendation letters, I am happy to write those. Just shoot me an email or visit me in Drown. I'm in 301C during the year. So that's 3rd floor in a little alcove. So don't be afraid to knock. My door is the one that's plastered in memes and Skeletor. My door was assaulted by a friend of mine. Okay, so we've come to it, the final week. This last lecture will paint, as I said, a broad brush connecting the work. I also want to take a moment to celebrate your accomplishments. I think I kind of already did that with saying you've powered through some really complex material and readings in a really quick way. So all power to you. And I want to give you a few questions. You'll see that I'll have green questions throughout this lecture sheet. You are not required to answer them, but they may help you think forward or where to go after this class. As we should all know now, Lovecraft is quintessentially a 20th century writer who has been adapted into the mindset of the 21st century reader and player. We also know some of the pitfalls of such adaptation work. This final lecture will present a few questions about where we could envision going from here and what is the future of such Lovecraftian adaptations. Key terms that I want you to focus in here is just one this week. It's the trope of the final girl. This is something written by a critical theorist who usually works in, I believe, the psychoanalytical realm, Carol Clover. She writes a lot on horror film, and in fact, if you check her out or take a class with Dr. Keatley, she will also bring Clover to the table. It's a really, really fun read. If you want the title or other essays, I can totally send that to you. But for today, what I want to focus in on is the trope of the final girl. So the final girl trope, and I'm skimming this right from Wikipedia's summary, I know, but I don't have Clover on me to do a direct quote. A common plot line in many horror films is one in which a series of victims is killed one by a killer amid increasing terror, culminating in a climax in which the last surviving member of the group, usually female, either vanquishes the killer or escapes. And essentially, for our purposes, we could apply this concept and trope to Aliens. Ripley, right? She is the moral backbone of the film. She's following policy of the nebulous company to a fault, and is never really heard by her male counterparts. That should be a trend that you should have picked up on within the first half an hour of the film, within the first hour of the film, in fact, of her being her authority constantly being undermined. She is third in command. She is third officer of the Nostromo. So it's really fun to wrestle with Ripley as this example of a final girl who ends up successfully destroying the alien. So I'm going to cover that terminology pretty much today in lecture. Before that, I want to respond to your posts. Wade, I'm happy with all your posts. I think y'all have the formula down rather well, and I love your responses to each other. I'm glad you all kind of liked In the Mouth of Madness. It's my least favorite Carpenter film. You should be noticing a trend. John Carpenter writes a lot of Lovecraftian films and directs a lot of Lovecraftian films. Sam Neill also likes working with John Carpenter, even though Sam Neill did not work with him for Event Horizon. You can see some major players actor-wise in this horror canon. So I want to jump in here real quick and just pull out a bit. Wade, I think your point is well taken. I love the fact that Trent is a horror newbie. Doesn't really like it, doesn't really read it. In fact, the first quote we get is from Kane's publisher, or Kane's literary agent, who's like, "Do you read Sutter Kane?" before taking an axe to the window. So there's a celebrity around Sutter Kane. We know Sutter Kane is a stand-in for Stephen King. That should be pretty apparent. Even just from the cover designs, we know that this writer has a huge cult following, like King does in the States here. So it's a really hyper-aware moment of the current horror genre, literary horror in our contemporary moment. And I think what you point to is one of my favorite moments in the film, and I think you're smart to highlight that those that typically doubt the power of horror end up being its victims, right? This is a trope that's huge across the fiction. Oh, that monster's not really real. I'll go bumbling off into the woods. Think of Blair Witch Project. And I think your overlay with Thacker and Trigg is very, very nicely done. I hope you all know by this point you should never doubt the horror, because if you doubt the horror, it'll come and bite you in the ass. So well done. Kayla, same thing. I really liked your reading of Dark Adventure Radio Theater, and it's because partly because I just wrote about it, and you're coming to similar conclusions. So I think you're right on the money with examining this framing device. I had this post kind of selfishly created to help me think through things as well as I was abroad. So really, really nice stuff. Your post was incredibly helpful. I think you do a great reading of the framing device. And again, as I said earlier in the lecture, this might be something that you would want to develop into a final paper if you're thinking about it, because I think you're on the right track here. I think also what I want to push here is this plot twist, or this narrative frame of the two detectives, Hale and Mallory. Their frame kind of creates a problem for us as readers, right? For the original story, The Call of Cthulhu, it's kind of timeless, right? There's no real date to the material that we find. There's no overpressing narrator that's telling us that it's a certain year for us. We kind of just stumble upon the letters from Thurston and all the materials from his professor, or from his uncle, great uncle, that we then have to wrestle with. So it's kind of timeless in that way. And yet the audio drama is forcibly in the Jazz Age, quote, present. So I think the way that they get us out with that present trap is the cliffhanger ending with Hale's betrayal. We're immediately going back and re-listening. You catch the details that he never wants to say the word Cthulhu. He doesn't want Mallory to say the words of the chant. He always wants to end the investigation. So I think you, upon a second listening, you pick up more on these narrative details, and you can pick the pieces together a bit better. The other thing is the props, right? They send us immediately back because they're not referenced in the audio drama itself. So I think this is a way to amplify mystery, as you say, but also to get us out of that present time lock in the Jazz Age that the new framing device that the Historical Society places on Call of Cthulhu. So really nice to see you wrestle with that. And same thing with In the Mouth of Madness. I think you are really nicely reading this. I think you're doing well isolating the narrative work that Carpenter's trying to accomplish. And, of course, you're picking apart. A bunch of you were talking about the unreliability of Trent, and that is foregrounded. The one thing that I would pitch to y'all, and Ian in particular, is what you make of the ending. The last scene of Trent is him laughing in the theater. What's going on there, and why do you think that's important? How do you think that's foreshadowed, as you call sometimes reverse foreshadowing, because we're constantly playing with time? Well, what happens when Trent realizes that he's actually a character in Sutter Kane's story, that everything up until this point was predetermined, and he had no free will? In a longer class, I would love to wrestle with the philosophical implications of that, but I think you're already starting to do it here. So really well done, Ian. So with that, again, your posts have been fantastic. I really enjoyed reading them on the plane. It was a 6.5 hour flight, so had a lot of time. So let's jump into Alien. This quote that we have here is from, of course, one of my favorite characters in the entire Alien series, Ash. Not Bilbo Baggins, though, the same actor. Says this great line after he's decapitated and the crew of the Nostromo activate him again, and they ask, what are our chances? How do we kill this alien? And his response is, I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies, which is such a knife in the ribs. So I pull this quote out just to introduce what we're talking about. A group of people wrestling with this unknowable and yet incredibly powerful, amoral, Ash is quick to say, amoral survival being, just purely out for survival. It's a hybrid creature also, and I want to underscore this. It's a hybrid creature. Ash calls the beast Kane's son, and it does, we know, sort of experience a sort of birth. Heads up, This movie gets a little graphic, both in the sexual sense and blood sense. So at times you may want to look away. I really encourage you to watch the chest burster scene, even if you're a little squeamish. It's disturbing. It's bad, but I think it's really important with the reading that I'm going to give at the end here. I think also this is a great example of a sci-fi film that is basically a redo of a slasher film in space. We have one monster slowly picking off one by one. I think only once does it kill two beings. That's Parker and Lambert, I believe, where we have a monster just picking people off for their behavior, either trying to subvert the creature, be a hero and go into the air vents, Dallas, or find their cat in Brett, played by Henry Dean Stanton. So I think we have this, like we had with Event Horizon. We have a movie genre that is building off of and just relocating the horror film, right? So in Event Horizon, we had the supernatural haunted house essentially in space. Take House and put it on a ship. And here we have Alien, where the slasher is this silent, obscure, amoral death machine that just hunts down the entire crew. So with that, I think we can apply Clover's theory about the final girl trope for Ripley. So I want you to pull out, I have a list here of things that you should know about the final girl trope and how Clover describes that character. Note that the final girl doesn't always have to be a final girl. It just has to be a final person. The trope itself is coming from the genre of slasher films, where it is predominantly a female figure, but it does not necessarily have to be a female figure. And also, really weird, it doesn't just have to be one person. But luckily, Alien's a little simple, so we can unpack the theory here. So one thing, the character is usually a virginal character who is duty-bound by a sense of morality. When I say virginal, I don't just mean that in the sexual sense. I mean that in every sense of the word. They are pure and innocent. This character never drinks, uses drugs, or engages in the teenage lust of slasher films. I'm sure you've all seen the jokes about slasher films. It's like, Jason's a great example, or Friday the 13th is a great example, because it's like, oh wow, we're at a creepy camp, let's have sex in this cabin, that makes sense. And then Jason comes up and kills the two teenagers who are having sex. Or the stoner character goes off and decides to light up. Well, he goes off, commits a vice, and is killed. This is contrasted with the final girl character, who is a pure character in contrast to her peers, usually done in by their vices. The final girl's development is also emphasized as the plot unfolds. You should notice that our attention is slowly placed on her and not the rest of the cast or the monster. So by at the start of the film, Ripley's kind of just another member of the crew. We know that she's third officer. We know that she's trying to assert her authority. And as the movie continues, the narrative focus really, really, really tightens in on her. So this is another example that Clover underscores as a final girl moment. And this has to do with our identification with her. Regardless of gender line, we are identifying with Ripley. And this comes to be important on point number 3 or 4. So the final girl also sheds her vulnerability and arms herself. This is big because the innocent, pure character suddenly takes up some sort of phallic weapon. Usually it's a machete, a sword, a pistol. In this case, it is a flamethrower and a harpoon gun, essentially. She takes that up and uses it as a weapon, empowering herself or themselves to destroy the creature, or the slasher, or the killer. One of those. So 4, this is big. She experiences dread and the abject terror that allows the audience to identify with her. She is essentially the cinematic whipping girl. Or whipping character. She's one that suffers the most abuse, psychologically, physically. She's the one who the monster kind of chases but never gets to. She's constantly in a state of panic or fear. She is put under by her peers. And Clover does an interesting thing with this. She says that such identification with this trope is only possible because it is normally a woman. And this is kind of big. If you read Clover more in depth, she analyzes audience reactions of identification, A, with the monster, and then B, with the final girl. And she comes to the conclusion that this is easier to do on a female body than it is to a male body. We can allow a woman, for good or ill, we can allow a woman to experience abject terror and be okay with it and still have that identification with them, but we can't do and have that same identification if it's a masculine subject. This is the point where Clover kind of loses me, because I don't necessarily agree all the time with her analysis, but it is a little older, and it's worth wrestling with and responding to later on. And in fact, many people have taken up arms against Clover for this reading. Finally, the final girl, as the name implies, survives the ordeal, but is fundamentally changed. By the end of the movie, you should see how Ripley is totally different than where we began, and how she has grown and or fractured throughout the movie. So it's always that she has internalized some part of the horror that she's experienced and has forever changed. She is no longer innocent or virginal. She is somehow infected or plagued by, haunted by, if you will, the monster, the slasher, the killer. So a question to think about. I won't read it full out, but you can wrestle with that. So Ripley is often seen as a version of the final girl trope, but since she returns in other films in the Alien franchise, Aliens, Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, don't watch it, the role gets seriously complicated. If you liked Alien, you should really check out Aliens. That's the second one, and I believe it's done by James Cameron. And if you watch that, I want you to pay more attention to Ripley's attitude and relationship with more macho male characters versus her relationship with those characters in this movie. You'll definitely see how Ripley has evolved from where she begins with in Alien to where she goes at the end of Aliens. That's the second one. During this viewing, at 37,000 feet, I was struck by the constant shutting down of Ripley's authority as third officer. Remember that the chain of command goes Dallas, Kane, and then Ripley. Ash is the biggest challenge to Ripley's authority, of course, because we find out at the end, is an android who has his own mission to complete. I won't go into detail lest I spoil. But he also mocks Ripley quite often throughout the film. There's this really, really intense scene where Ripley confronts him in the medbay after Kane is infected, and he comes down to saying, well, you have your job, I have my job, why don't you let me do mine? Even though she outranks him. I think it's important to note. Parker and Brett also openly mock Ripley about wanting to visit the maintenance decks below the ship. And they trick her. They turn on valves. They have it real noisy and steamy, and they kind of play dumb with her until she leaves. Even Dallas flees Ripley's questioning about her moral duty to the laws of the company, and it takes Ripley the locking of a door, shutting the door in front of him, so she locks herself in a room with him to understand why he did not follow protocol. So this is something that a pattern that I've noticed in this viewing, and I'm interested to see what you guys think about it. It's just one thing that's been plaguing me, especially in relationship to her status as a final girl, because even at the end, it seems like Ripley's authority is still challenged, and she still falls into following Dallas's plan regardless of what's happening. So I think it's an interesting sort of trend to follow. The other thing that you should notice in the beginning that I think syncs nicely up to Trigg and Thacker is the constant within the first hour of the film of the cast going, I don't know, but let's find out, or this is unknowable, let's go see. So there's this drive to explore, and the big one here is his downfall is Kane. So they explore the derelict alien ship. There's a constant need to be exploring. I think one of my favorite lines is Kane as they enter the ship that's kind of like biomechanical, and there's enough to be said just all about that. Come on down here. There's something different down here. Well, there's something different everywhere. And yet he's always looking for the next difference or the next thing to explore, the next alien egg that'll be his doom. So the other thing off of this that I want you to think about is how the film plays with audience anticipation. You'll notice that we don't get to see the alien in full form until later in the narrative, and I think this is important, especially in conversation with Trigger Thacker. So I want to see what you think of that. Finally, with Alien, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the overt sexual imagery. So the artist responsible for the design, excuse me in my misspelling, and the design of alien tech in the film is Giger. He was a German artist, absolutely insane. If you look up his work, clearly Ridley Scott kept turning back to him. The Alien movies also used his work throughout. The most recent is the Prometheus movie, went back to a more Giger-esque design. So it's definitely hyperly sexualized. And the way that I'm going to prove this, because I can't just say that's what it is without proof, is I want to look at a few little stills from the movie. The first one being where Kane, Lambert, and Dallas enter into the derelict ship. Now, despite the title of the JPEG, I think we can all be mature enough to say that these are two vaginal openings. In either way, these humans are walking in to a birth canal. This overt sort of sexual imagery of humanity walking into a larger birthing area of a species that is unknown, completely unknown to them. Same thing with the close-up of the face hugger. Pay attention to the eggs. Pay attention to the morphology of the face hugger and the alien. It's overt, and it's supposed to be uncannily similar to reproductive organs for a reason. My question to you is, what do you think that reason is? Is it just to be the sexual organs, or is it supposed to stand in for a larger reading that might sync up with Trigg's preoccupation? Remember that Trigg said we are constantly obsessed with this pre-personal being, or this being out of time that challenges our ontology of the world and our experience. Well, this is showing a genetic linkage, right? We have Kane having a birth, essentially, after being penetrated. We have these overtly reproductive animals that are rather terrifying and uncomfortable to see. But my argument would be that they're uncomfortable to see because they evoke that feeling of a being that can spawn us, or that spawns a being that subverts our entire philosophical understanding. And that's if we buy Trigg. The other is pay attention to the fixation on mouths within this film. We open up with eating and waking up. We open up with entering caverns, or having Kane be face hugged. The animal, or the alien, is actually called a face hugger in Ridley Scott's terminology. Being sort of assaulted by the mouth with less gravitas. Here is towards the end of the film where we find out that Ash is an android, and he paradoxically tries to choke Ripley with a rolled up magazine. Notice, however, that Ripley is essentially being a mirror for the alien. In this weird way, she is being identified with the alien, which has a double set of jowls. It has its main mouth and then a little tiny mouth. This is the same thing that's happening here. And then towards the end of the film, we get more and more focus on the mouth. So I'm curious to see what you make of this. I think to help unpack this might be Trigg, and what we were discussing last week. Finally, to really put a icing on the cake about this concept of birth and reproduction is the computer. The AI of the ship is called Mother. To access Mother, you have to go through a corridor, a narrow corridor, into a large womb, warm-like space that you see here. And I'm not the only one who has reached out for this reading, so it's not just my demented mind. But the idea that this film is in tandem with challenging gender norms with Ripley is also preoccupied about the horrors of reproduction, and the sanctity of the womb itself, right? Only certain people are allowed in the womb at certain times. That's why when Ash goes in, it's kind of upsetting. He sneaks in. Dallas is the only one that's allowed to talk to Mother. Ripley then inherits the ability to talk to Mother after Dallas's death, after she becomes a Dallas stand-in. So it's fascinating for me to wrestle with these more gendered implications and arguments in tandem with the notion of Ripley as a final girl. So while brushing up on the Freudian side of things, it might also be fun to take a quick look at the AI who runs the ship, Mother, and the fact that Ripley kills Mother, essentially. So when she goes to self-destruct the ship, Mother, she doesn't do it in time, and Mother gleefully says that the ship will self-destruct in 5 minutes and starts counting down, and Ripley goes, "Shut up, you bitch," and ruins the computer interface. So for me, what I want you to think about is how does all of this imagery respond to Trigg's sense of that being out of time that is, internalized within us? If, as Trigg claims, horror is obsessed with this pre-us creature, why would this film then focus on the sexual relationship between non-human beastie, the alien, and very human characters? If you're still hunting for paper topics this week, this might be one to explore, if you so desire. So, for the rest of the week, the materials that are available for the rest of the week vary here between 2 video game playthroughs and explanations. Bloodborne's being uploaded as we speak. Darkest Dungeon will happen shortly after that. A really trite allusion to the Call of Cthulhu by none other than the band Metallica, although there was a plethora of Lovecraft references in music. In fact, a quick Google search, if you're looking still to do that bonus assignment, will help you find a song or a band. Ozzy Osbourne also, when he was with Black Sabbath, also took from Lovecraft quite directly, I believe, at the Mountains of Madness. And you'll be reading the last 2 stories, and these 2 are personal favorites of mine, The Hound and The Statement of Randolph Carter. Both of these do not deal with the sort of cosmic Lovecraft that we've read up until this point. I chose this because I think in this last week, what we're narrowing in on is how to see a Lovecraftian aesthetic. Last week it was lip service or direct adaptation. The week before that was kind of underscoring themes and bringing them together. Here, we are in meta themes and bringing them together. Here, I want to focus in on what people have already labeled as Lovecraftian, but don't directly borrow from source material. Bloodborne itself never has any reference to Lovecraft, as far as I know, although it's definitely an inspiration. And it's interesting that just because a beast has tentacles or is coming from the nether realm of the cosmos, it automatically is codified as something Lovecraftian. Well, this week puts that into question. So I really want you to be smart about applying that adjective to certain texts. So it's an obscure term that gets overused. So what I want you to think about is to focus in on the question, what does it mean, or the questions, what does it mean to have a Lovecraftian feeling to something? And are the aesthetics of something and not direct adaptations more successful than the other direct adaptations that we have seen? So is just claiming aesthetics, the themes of Lovecraft, these angles that aren't right or non-Euclidean angles, the creepy cityscapes, the narrators who surely say they will go insane if they relate their story and then relate their story, the focus on degeneration. Are these all part and parcel of a universal Lovecraftian thing or adjective? And if so, are the adaptations better suited just picking on the aesthetic level or just focusing on a one-to-one adaptation or a hodgepodge in the case of In the Mouth of Madness. So this question essentially is the meat of the course, and we talked about this in the first week. The final stories that you were reading, as I said, don't deal with Lovecraft's mythos directly. They're a monster story and almost a ghost story. They focus on the drive for humans to understand and chart out the unknown. The same thing that's happening here. In the case of the Hound, it's perverse pleasure, artistic pleasure. Kind of fun. Which leads me to think about how this desire to know might be the reason for so many failed and successful Lovecraftian pieces of literature, film, games, and art. And trust me, there are a lot that fail at unpacking Lovecraft for whatever that means. They're just not good. And I wonder if it's because we are constantly trying to know and understand what Lovecraft kept in vague terms that these tend to fail. Or if they tend to fail because they rely too much on trying to capture that feeling. So one of the major takeaways here is to be able to not just do this with the horror field or Lovecraft, but to be able to apply this sort of pattern recognition and analysis in any sort of art and media that I think is desperately lacking in our current day. This ability to make connections between what we're reading, what we're viewing, what we're listening to, and say, okay, this is kind of old. And why are we, and then asking the question, why are we preoccupied with this? So what I chose to do for this course, and what I hopefully you had fun analyzing, was taking a set of patterns that I've noticed over the course of years and putting it to the test and going, okay, why do we keep coming back to Lovecraft? Why, what is it about his writing that makes us interpret it or adapt it to one-to-ones or just aesthetically? Why has he become a cultural touchstone in the horror field? Again, these are broad questions that we could never answer in 7 weeks, but I hope by the end of this we're well on our way. So what this course then was just a tool to hone your ability to set up and find and test patterns elsewhere, and then apply the same rigor of analysis that you have done all really well here throughout the course the past 6 to 7 weeks. So I do want to say at the end here, congratulations. This has been one of the most challenging courses that I've wrestled with, partly because it's online and I can't see your reactions to these lectures, so I can't tell if my jokes and campy behavior are falling on deaf ears. More than likely, I assume that they are. That's just because I'm not always funny. But I think I've been more impressed with your level of engagement over this summer and your ability to wrestle with really complex material and get it down really quickly. So I do want to underscore that you all are very talented readers, and you all are really solid writers. And I look forward to reading your final papers. And I just want to say once again, thank you very much for playing along. If you have any questions going into this final week or going forward, or you need a letter down the road, just shoot me an email and let me know. I will be happy to help any of you out in the best way that I can. So thank you again for playing this rather crazy, horrific experiment, and I hope all of you enjoyed this sort of toe dipping into the larger pond that is horror fiction and adaptation. With that, take care, enjoy the rest of your summer after this week, and maybe I'll see you around on campus. Have a good one, guys.